So welcome, Grace Ann Converse. How are you?
Doing all right. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, good stuff. Good stuff. Now, I saw your article that got published on the Mises.org website. I have to read this because I can never get it straight. Economists and psychologists are weaponizing psychology and the idea of rationality. Now, can you perhaps explain what got you to write that and well how you actually got it published as well?
Okay, sure. So I have done a little bit of undergraduate study in the field of behavioral economics,
Mm-hmm.
which is basically an application of behaviorism in psychology, which is a field of study which pretty much holds that like human behavior can to a certain degree be explained through reflexes that have been I don't want to say programs, but imprinted on the human brain through evolution, along with just reinforcement history of like past experience.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, takes that field of psychology and applies it to economics, arguing that the neoclassical definition of rationality is too restrictive, and that in order to update the field of economics, so to speak, to more accurately represent reality, we need to talk about using um, centralized regulation
Hmm.
in order to.
I like the way you put that in the same sentence as rationality. Central
Oh yeah,
planning and rationality, two
yeah.
opposites. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Basically using centralized planning and regulation to compensate for the psychological faults that are inherent in the human experience
Hmm.
and that stop us from maximizing utility in the marketplace.
Hmm.
Now, from an Austrian perspective, we already knew that the neoclassical definition of rationality was a little bit strange,
Hmm.
economically speaking. However, uh, a long time before behavioral economics entered the mainstream, Austrian theorists um, were already pioneering like alternate economic models, which could adequately explain human behavior without resorting to trying to like regulate people to fit
Hmm.
this neoclassical paradigm. So basically, I had been looking for an opportunity to write about this for like quite a while, but there was just so much there that it's like I needed one concrete example in order to like get it into a succinct enough format for an article. And then the GameStop craze comes along when for anyone on the off chance that anybody listening to this isn't familiar with the GameStop craze,
Hmm.
basically a bunch of investors on Reddit realize that GameStop, the dying video game retail chain, is being very heavily shorted, as in shorted up to 240% of the available shares, which goes without saying, more than they actually have. And such is the nature of the short sale that I'm probably oversimplifying things. I'm not like a finance guru.
It's okay.
Such is the nature of the short sale that not only are the companies that shorted it required to buy back all of those shares, but the companies those shorts do not expire. So as long as investors buy and hold GameStop, then eventually these hedge funds that perpetrated this are going to have to pay uh, pay for these GameStop shares, and
Billions. Yeah.
um,
Hmm.
Reddit basically gets to name the price
Yeah.
if they grab all of these shares while they're still in like single digit prices. And that's what they did. Now, of course, you hop on any given mainstream news outlet and they'll explain this sort of thing, but what they will not explain is that definitionally, upon buying that share, you're guaranteed to get your money as long as you and everybody else hold. It's not hysteria. It is not like a bubble. The only bubble that is being caused is the artificial spike in demand that's going to happen when all of these short sellers buy it back. In no way was the economic decision that the Redditors made when they were buying this irrational. If anything, it was a solid plan, something that a lot of hedge funds have already been doing since time immemorial, and it stood to make them a lot of money. But it went against the powers that be. And the powers that be didn't like that. So the powers that be go to their cronies in the media and they complain. And then the media participates in this illegal market manipulation in order to try to gin up um, lack of confidence in these investing decisions and try and get retail investors to sell. Curiously, while the Robinhood investment app was malfunctioning, and while we see these very interesting price patterns on GameStop and the other shorted stocks, where every single time something's about to spike, sales close on the exchange and it goes back down.
Mm-hmm.
And then once markets are closed, when you look at that, they're trading between each other off market in order to lower the price. Who would have thought? Huh. So anyway, basically tarring the Redditors as irrational, using the concepts of behavioral economics to try and which is basically just taking pop psychology and saying oh yeah, acting like you know more about the consumer than the consumer does themselves. Yes, even though I'm not a psychologist, either not a psychologist or not an economist, even though I'm not necessarily qualified in these fields, let alone qualified to know why you do what you do. Even though there's this excruciatingly obvious logic behind your investment that you explain on the subreddit where you're planning the investment. Even though, worst case scenario, this could be perceived as gambling, and gambling is in and of itself a form of recreational spending and not irrational. And even assuming that this doesn't make money, it's a rational decision to do this because it stands a chance to bankrupt the hedge funds that all of these millennials on Reddit are blaming for crashes like 2008, crashes like the COVID crash. Regardless of their political views, they hate Wall Street and they know that Wall Street is never going to give them justice. We've seen this time and time and time and time again. Wall Street will not, under the law, be punished for anything that they do. And revenge is a completely rational strategy outside the law. So of course you're going to buy GameStop, but of course the media is going to look at that, realize that in order to acknowledge the Redditors as rational, then they have to acknowledge the existence of a motivation that they don't like. They have to acknowledge that the system is fundamentally broken and that a couple of retail investors on a little stock app managed to throw Wall Street into more of a panic than Occupy did over however many years that went on.
I heard it was 72 billion that they actually lost. Some of these hedge funds, it was 72 billion combined, which was well, let's put it this way. They gambled and they didn't come out winning. So
yeah.
It's not a, I always say that capitalism is profit and loss, and what they want, what the Wall Street and the big tech people and the Democrats want is just permanent profit. They don't want it, and they want all the losses to go onto somebody else, not themselves, which isn't capitalism. The free market would sort that out in no time.
Yeah, lucky we have the government as a burden shifting mechanism so that the people who are making these gambles on the market never have to pay.
That's a good point, yeah, because government always shifts the the losses onto taxpayers who never get to vote on it, never get to have a say on, do I want to actually bail out Wall Street? And the answer is always, okay, well, if you don't bail us big boys out, then poor people will suffer. It's well, it's just the most obtuse way of viewing things.
Oh yeah, we're too big to fail. We're too big to fail. Maybe it's because you didn't allow smaller competitors to enter the market.
Too big to succeed. Yes, is what I say.
Yeah.
Okay. So carry on. So this was what the basis for your article was, and this is how you got it all together.
Yeah, pretty much. All of the ideas were already there, and I just took the opportunity to apply them as soon as I hopped on my news feed and I saw hedge fund managers on MSNBC flipping out and saying that these retail investors didn't know what they were doing. When, yes, retail investing is a risk, but it's always a risk. And you'll notice none of them actually gave any logical explanation with data as to why this wasn't going to work. No, because the data says there's no way that they bought back all of these shares. And the data says just because one hedge fund goes bankrupt, that just means that they shift the burden onto whoever bought them out, and they've got to buy the stock.
Mm-hmm.
All they're doing is playing hot potato, and eventually the music's gonna stop.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, they can't admit that. So it's at this point, it's not even it doesn't even mean anything anymore. Rational just means, are you pursuing the ends that we think you should pursue according to the means that we personally approve of? And are you doing it without raising too much of a stink?
Mm-hmm.
It's frankly laughable that this is considered to be like you're just coasting at that point. You're just coasting off of the weight of your authority.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ever wonder why people think that economics is junk science or something like that, it's because of this. It's because economics is uniquely suited to people in power who take economic theory and beat it until it says what they want.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Which is why they hate
so
capitalism so much. They hate the free market. When I say capitalism, I mean laissez-faire,
mhm.
unregulated free market capitalism. No government involvement in the economy, separation of church and state, separation of economy and state. It's exactly that principle. I don't know. It would be, and it's the hardest thing to get across to people, because it seems to me that the big corporations, they are blaming capitalism, or allowing capitalism to be blamed on capitalism themselves, in order to make themselves look bad. But they're the ones who don't want capitalism. If they admit that they aren't capitalistic, then where does the argument go from there? This is the hardest thing. So they play this, like I call it, like WWF. Well, you blame me and I blame you. So the Democrats blame the Republicans, Republicans blame the Democrats, and the corporates, blame anything they can do. It's, as you say, these Redditors' fault for causing losses to the pension funds. What about the poor pensioners who are going to lose money because of what you did? Well, it's like, well, that money doesn't disappear. It is spent into the economy, and other people will get some of that money, but it's not theirs. It's as if they've got a right to it. This is the hardest thing.
And moreover, how many poor pensioners are putting money into hedge funds?
Yeah.
First of all,
Well,
and
the
second of
hedge
all,
funds, well, people who manage pensions might be putting money into those hedge funds in some amounts from people's pension funds. It might be that way. Probably not the individual people who are running the pensions. It's probably,
oh,
yeah, yeah,
people who have pensions give their money to pension
yeah,
managers, who give their money to hedge fund
yeah.
managers, who
That's it.
use it to make an irresponsible economic decision in an
Hmm.
attempt to pocket profit from money that is not theirs.
Hmm.
Redditors call them on it. Redditors make an economic decision. It's the Redditors' fault.
Yeah. And where is that situation now, that with the Reddit and the Wall Street bets and these things? What is the current situation? Because I haven't. I've got to admit, the last week, I've been in the garden doing a lot of things here, but I haven't been paying much attention to the news. It's been quite nice. But what was the last thing you heard on where it was stood?
As far as I know, they're still holding. I mean, recently there was a spike. A lot of people were saying that GameStop was never going to come up over 100 again. Just this past week, I believe,
Hmm.
there was I mean, I'm not following it too closely either, but just this past week, there was a spike up to like 340. Same level as
Wow.
nearly the same level as the old spike. That once again, exact same pattern, gets cut off.
Yeah. And they have these
But
margin calls as well, don't they? So you can only buy, I think it was like 5,000 shares or something at one go. You're not allowed to buy anything smaller than that. Well, who's got that kind of money? If they're 340 a share, and you're buying 5,000 of them, just the maths on that is, it's a huge amounts of money. So nobody else can, but you can sell, but you can't buy. So it's basically what is happening in there. But it was interesting. I just thought it's a great thing. I mean, if it stops a lot of this short selling, these people who are expecting a guaranteed profit, the hedge fund managers and so on, they'll be so gun shy to ever do a short again, because other people will be there waiting for them to do it and calling them on it. So,
mhm.
but that's great. That is, it's a market mechanism. That is exactly what it is. And it just shows you that these big companies are highly vulnerable when they don't have the power of government behind them. And look what they did. They went run straight to government, straight to the media, straight to them to actually get these positions made very difficult for the people in the Reddit sphere. So
Mhm. Of course, it's really fun when you see a lot of, left-leaning political commentators, that sort of thing, hopping on after the GameStop high happens and then insisting like, yep, this is why capitalism bad.
Yeah, you're still calling it capitalism when it's rigged, a rigged market.
It's,
Well, it's like, well,
yes,
I guess in a way it is. It is cap. I remember Milton Friedman saying, the Soviet Union was a capitalistic system, even though it was called communism, because it did have 30% of the economy was allowed to be something like, a free exchange, although it was heavily regulated, but there was exchange going on. They weren't using barter; they were using money, and so it was defined as a capitalistic system. But of course, it was completely gutted of any meaning. It certainly wasn't a free market, just people turning up at a marketplace, which is the hardest thing to explain to people. So all capitalism is just a market. Imagine going to a Sunday market. You turn up, bring what you've got, and you can sell to anybody. And then imagine all around the outskirts of this Sunday market, you've got a load of people going, I know how to regulate this so that we get a share of that. And this is exactly what happens when government interferes. And then you get people saying, we don't like this trader. He's selling too cheaply, or he's got too much. He's making too much, and we can't compete. Put regulations on him so that we get a share of the profits as well. But the person who suffers, of course, is the end user. So.
mhm. Alternately, I mean, you could use the other functional definition of just capitalism being, or at least the definition that the left likes to use, capitalism when they bother defining terms.
Mm-hmm. Do they ever? Yeah.
Yeah, the system where people hold, where people are permitted to hold property that they didn't invest their labor into, and permitted to make profit off of property that they didn't invest their labor into, which a few problems with that. First of all, where do you draw the line on making a profit off of property that you didn't invest your labor into?
Mm-hmm.
Second of all money is just your labor converted into an alternate form.
Mm-hmm.
Third of all, if you didn't invest your labor into it, the entire reason why we have like a modern structure of production is because people who did not invest their labor into something are willing to contribute money to people who do have the labor and skill sets necessary to do it in order to make it happen. Like without this concept of investment, specialization of labor is hopelessly drawn back into the mud. And of course, you'll even have people on the right who say like, oh yeah, I have a problem with like unrestricted economic growth because it generally has like deleterious effects on like local culture, or like they consider like consumerism to be amoral and that sort of thing. Which, okay, I mean, first of all, we don't have to prove we're not utopianists like the left. We don't have to prove that we don't have to prove that a society with even a slightly freer market is somehow going to magically make anything better. We just have to prove that it's better than corporatism.
Yeah, I would
And
say it's like it's an optimal system. It's a bit like saying, okay, well, do you think, capitalism? Because I often, whenever I discuss this with friends and that, they say, oh, well, it's utopian. I'm going, no, utopia is a place where nobody suffers. Capitalism, free market, unregulated capitalism, involves a lot of hard work. You've got to go out there every day pleasing your customers. The customer is the regulator. And who's that? That's you and I. But it's like I say to them, it's an optimal system as it is at the moment. Tomorrow it won't be an optimal system. It's like saying, is this cell phone I've got here, this Samsung, Galaxy Note 10, the best cell phone? Well, when I bought it, it was one of the best cell phones out there, and within weeks there was a better model around. It's a bit like Formula One cars. It's like, well, yeah, at that race, they're all great cars, but that car in the next race would be easily beaten by the same car in the next race, if that makes sense. If it raced against itself one race back, it would easily beat itself because they've advanced. And that's what capitalism, free market, unregulated capitalism does. It's like you go into this mobile phone shop and you buy a different, better one at better prices. Same with flat screen TVs, same with computers and so on. Every time you go in there, usually just as you bought one, there's something much better comes out, and that's what happens. Imagine the whole economy being like that, and that's the way I try and define it to people. It's not a perfect system. There isn't such a thing because it involves work. It's not like you can all sit there and do nothing and get rich. or have the lifestyle you want, people have to go and work. If it's not us, it'll be the Chinese doing it, which seems to be a lot of what's going on at the moment. They're doing all the work, and we think we've got it great. Well, wait till those things start to change. But so
Yeah, in general, it's just interesting because um, at bottom, capitalism will give to a society what it is they are willing to pay for.
mhm.
And if society at large is willing to pay for things you don't like, then it's going to happen regardless of what um, regardless of what anyone else has to say about it. Human ingenuity, for good or for evil, knows no bounds. So if, to be honest, eventually you have to draw a line somewhere. Otherwise, you're going to be just obsessively monitoring every aspect of human behavior to no actual long-term benefit, which is kind of what we see now. And honestly, the line you draw is
And who does the
if it,
monitoring as well is the question, isn't it? Well,
yeah,
why are they
oh yeah,
perfect human beings that know exactly what to do? We wouldn't be in such a mess if their decisions were great. So, well, perhaps I could drag us back onto the, how the economists and psychologists are weaponizing
oh yeah.
psychology and the idea of rationality. So perhaps you can say a few more things about that, and then we can get through onto your article, and then we can perhaps go on to some other subjects as well.
Okay. So I have been I attended Mises University 2019 and 2020, which for anybody who doesn't know, Mises University is a program that the Mises Institute puts on every year for like 1 week. That's like Austrian economics boot camp.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
I went there.
you did this in Auburn, did you? You went all the way to there, to Auburn, Alabama, to do it, or was it online?
Yep.
Yeah. Wow. Cool.
Yes, I went to Auburn,
Auburn.
Alabama, and
Yes,
it
there you
was
go.
the first time in my life that I had traveled off of the West Coast.
Wow.
Which,
Well, it's a long way. People say Americans are parochial. I'm going, well, do you know how far it is across Texas? It's like, twice as far as what the United Kingdom is. It's, people moan about going to Manchester, which is like 200 or 300 miles away. And it's like, yeah, you wouldn't go up there every day. So it's like, it's just the distances are vast out there. But sorry, go on, carry on. I'm interrupting you again.
yeah, it's fine. It's fine. So I worked like on and off with, or rather had a few conversations with Dr. Jonathan Newman from Bryan College, because who had been previously there lecturing. We initially met because he was lecturing on quantitative methods in Austrian economics, and I, being an applied math major, had an interest in it. We went on to discuss behavioral economics because it turned out that he had done some reading on the subject, and I wanted to talk to someone with some more wisdom and experience about the ideas I had. And he suggested that I write an article and publish it. So I did, and I
Why did you
sent
pick that
an email
subject?
to her. Oh, I sorry.
Why did you pick that particular subject then? What was that? Because as soon as I read the article, I was thinking, yes, this is exactly what's going on. The weaponization of words and psychology, everything is being turned against it, and you so rarely see it. When you read the Mises articles, I think a lot of people get bogged down in economic theory and doing that instead of actually what's going on is like a little game that's being played in the background. And so it just jumped out of me straight away. I was like, yes, this is exactly what's going on, which is hence why I invited you on the podcast.
Oh yeah. So I chose the subject mostly because it was something that I noticed, that the modern state is still driven by crisis. However, our taste in crises has changed over the past century or so. We used to be a wartime state, and now we are, which I believe, like the era of America being like the modern wartime state. I'm no historian, but I'd estimate that it happened after the Great Depression. We enter into the 20th century, the century of war, the century of government expansion. At the dawn of the 21st century, there's 2008, and now we are entering into a new era of government expansion. The wartime state is no longer enough, seeing as the nature of war has changed, and in the willingness of the populace to bear it.
Yes.
Well, they're still definitely willing to bear it as long as they don't have to look at it.
Yeah, it's
But
incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
which cynical, yes, but true. Now we live in an era, the era of the public health crisis, where given the not to harp about the moral breakdown of society or whatever, but given the increased tolerance for personal freedom, in a sense, like personal choice, lifestyle, freedom of personal lifestyle choices in America, and like the dissolution of traditional bounds. This is conducive to like the dissolution of traditional bonds outside of the state. So of course it would be, if not actively encouraged, at least definitely not punished. With the rise of this, we see the rise of the public health state. Using the argument, oh, it's for your own good, to cram anything down the throats of the public, along with, new psychological theories dedicated to the argument that people can't know for themselves what is for their own good. People have already commentated on how like a lot of, and even like, mainline conservatives too, let's give them credit for this. They pointed this out, how society seems to have become like more infantilized over the past few decades. This is no coincidence. Hand in hand with the idea that the average person is less likely to know what's for their own good, comes like the dissolution of traditional family structures dissolve, traditional career paths dissolve. They become impossible thanks to intervention in the economy. And this develops to the point where you have this generation of millennials, which people criticize all of the time for being like, oh, they're so childish. It's because the traditional normal ways of being an adult have been barred to them by this rapid change in culture, this rapid change in the economy. So what is left for them? This
they seem
state,
like overgrown children is what it seems like.
This state of which, yes, part of it is just kind of like stop. Part of it, one could just pull the like stop whining card, but then the other part of it is, to be fair, they were put in the least conducive possible situation for this. Like, okay, say what you will about millennials being the participation trophy generation. They were raised by like boomer flower children that just kind of dropped the ball, if it makes sense. Probably, I don't like playing generational, what's the word? Battle of the generations or something like that, just because no one wins. But very long story short,
another war.
Yeah. So now there's just been this situation created where all of these people are barred from traditional paths to adulthood. All of these people are barred from traditional institutions outside of the state. So what are they going to look to?
Yeah.
What is left?
Yeah.
What remains for them outside of traditional family structures? What remains to them outside of God? What remains to them when like normal modes of like what remains to them when normal modes of artistic expression, say, have been like diluted and made inaccessible? Normal modes of like scientific pursuit have been diluted and made inaccessible. All of these crucial aspects of the formation of culture, all of these crucial aspects of society that were never supposed to be the purview of the state, have just been subsumed into this Leviathan, if you will, probably using the term incorrectly. But and so now what's left? Of course everyone's willing to swallow the idea that they can't figure out what qualifies as their own good. They've been barred from figuring out anything
They've
else.
been totally
And
confused, haven't they? All their reference points have been taken away. The family type thing has been, taken away. Even the bonds between men and women, the relationships there, the young and the old, black and white, all of these things have been set into conflict in order to confuse, which is the part of the strategy. Because you say that the rhetorical strategy being used is known as Mott and Bailey, which I love this. I love this term, and I know we had some exchanges about that by text. But it's can you perhaps go into what the strategy is and explain that Mott and Bailey, because I think you did it very well.
Okay. So to clarify, Mod and Bailey, first of all, I'll confess, it doesn't have much to do with like, okay, it's a big change of topic. This hasn't, it's separate from the whole like public health
Yep.
state thing. This is, it's an informal fallacy that's been around for a long time. However, I did a little bit of research on it in like 2014. It was popularized as like a term in internet discourse by Slate Star Codex, and I believe I specifically read about it from Michael Malice in The New Right. Love that book, by the way. Would highly recommend it. Which now is probably the good time for a quick caveat. I don't study political science. I did debate in high school and college. I have done a lot of independent reading in the area of political science. I'm not exactly like the expert, though. This is just my observations on the topic and probably some stuff that I'm remembering from stuff I read from people who are smarter than me.
Yeah, so they're very
So,
insightful. The things that you've said are very insightful. So you seem to be observing them. I mean, I think of myself at your age. I wouldn't have even known if someone had tried to explain it to me. I wouldn't have even understood it. But you've picked this up yourself. So more power to you.
well, thank you. I try.
Yeah,
Um,
and
so,
there's plenty of examples out there today. That's for sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably part of it is just, just living in Portland
Hmm.
does things to you when you're, your average right-wing person sort of a thing. So, okay. So Mon and Bailey, I'll get back to the topic.
Hmm.
Um, is this rhetorical strategy which involves the speaker, let's say, making like they'll start with by making like a completely normal, like if you're a good person, if you conceive of yourself as not being the kind of person who like kicks puppies for fun or something like that, of
Hmm.
course you're going to agree with this statement. Like just basic example, like the statement, immigrants are people deserving of rights. Of course they are. Immigrants are people. Immigrants deserve basic human rights. Who doesn't agree with that? If you don't, I'm a little bit concerned. But anyway, so and then from there they'll move on to a completely separate, much more complicated assertion that by no means flows from the initial premise. So like immigrants are people deserving of rights, therefore you need to support, in order to support human rights, you have to support unlimited immigration through the US Mexico border.
So they
No holds
change the
barred.
meaning of it. So they change the meaning from one thing and then tar you with the bad thing in order to get you to agree with it, smear you with something.
Yes,
Yes, and watch you
because
wriggle trying to get yourself cleansed of it. Yeah.
yep.
Hmm.
Because on the one hand, I'm just adjusting this because there's a slight chance I'm going to have to plug my laptop in.
Okay.
Um, sorry, I'm in a little bit of a weird configuration here. Anyway, so um, it's fun because even though it works by manipulating terms, because it's not so much like changing the direct meaning, in that in between those two assertions, like immigrants are people, support unlimited immigration through the US Mexico border, there's a huge list of different assertions which have to be proven between point A and point B.
Hmm.
But if they ignore them, then you have to be the person who brings them up. And if you're the person who brings them up, then that means that they can stop you when you say immigrants are people deserving of rights, but. And putting but
Yep.
after a statement like immigrants are people deserving of rights sounds
It's
horrible.
suicide. Never do it.
Yeah. You don't want to do it. Nobody else wants to listen to you do it. It's horrible. But it doesn't change the fact that there's this huge list of assertions in between point A and point B that never actually got proven. And you can do this with a huge, an enormous list of arguments that are like fawns to the left. They'll pick something that's just like political or social suicide to go against that you don't want to go against because you can make the argument without going against it that has nothing to do with what you're talking about, and they will shoehorn it in and make you address that, which when you think about it, it's just in elaborate form of like arguing the conclusion from the propositions, like immigrants are people of deserving of rights, therefore unlimited immigration because basic human right is unlimited immigration. You're arguing the conclusion from the propositions. You're making a loop, and your argument is essentially it's invalid. Mm-hmm. It's a non-argument. But of course, the ideal is your opponent doesn't get that far.
So, and the thing is, it's, you know, to even use those, because I've reviewed quite a lot of arguing tactics, how to win arguments, and all this type of thing. It's like, I think, you know, the Austrians and, you know, Mises sort of people that you and I would perhaps read and perhaps know. We don't. We just seem to. We want to be honest and truthful. We want to find out what is the truth of the matter. We're not interested in winning an argument. If we have a bad argument, or we've got a bad policy or a bad idea about something, then you've got to refine it to make it better. But this mindset doesn't apply to the people in power and to the left, and an awful lot of people who call themselves Republicans, you know, conservatives as well, do this. They just want their way, and they'll do anything to get it. Which I always think that's the language of the con man. You know, that's not the language of somebody who's being open and fair and caring, if you like.
Mm-hmm. Of course, on the one hand, I mean, that's definitely true. Mm-hmm. But eventually it gets to the point where, like, okay, desperate times call for desperate measures. And in this specific situation, if you're sitting down next to a person who is making these kinds of arguments, knowing on some level what they are doing, because there's two chances. One is that, like, they're not into politics and they're just repeating this. That happens. Where it's just like they don't understand why a good person would say something like what you're saying. And of course, they assume that, like, that's on you.
Into the argument, they're probably bought into the argument that, you know, and honest people might go, yeah, okay, it just sounds nice, I'll do it. You know, it just sounds like a nice thing to do. They may just be genuine people who have just, you know, didn't know any different. So sorry, carry on. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's the sort of thing where it's like if they hear the argument from a trusted source and then they're watching you go against it, it's going to be a he said, she said thing, and you're playing that with, like, CNN. So, which in most circles you're not going to win that. Mm-hmm. But if you're sitting down and talking to somebody who's actually, like, vested in political theory, and they're pulling something like this out, and they don't bother to pull out anything more refined, anything more intellectually honest, let's say, then it's getting to the point where it's like there's no point. You're just in this argument to sit there and watch somebody else rip apart your reputation over nothing. There is nothing that you can possibly. That's the thing that, like, a lot of old conservatives don't get. They'll make the argument like, oh yeah, progressives keep doing this, but, like, the way that we get around it is just through, like, rationality, honest argumentation, all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't work. It's I mean, and you're saying, you know, you are next to somebody and you're having these political philosophy discussions and they're pulling these things. The only thing I can think of doing is just saying, well, look, you're just using the modern Bailey fallacy, and then explain to the audience why it's the fallacy. And every time it's the, you know, a different type of argument, the runaway train, you know, it might be this type of, you know, all these type of little tricks that they put in there. Just say, oh no, that's that one. And what he's doing here is this. Just expose their tactics. It's really all you can do in that situation, because you're not going to convince them, and they will make you look bad if you act, should we say, just addressing their arguments as if they're honest, because they're not. They come from a lot of false premises, as I would say. Mm-hmm.
Okay, where was I? So, Yeah, so essentially, it's getting to the point where you have old conservatives that genuinely believe that the response to a situation like this is to just like use logical argumentation more. Which, first of all, on the one hand, I love logical argumentation. I'm a big fan of logical argumentation. There are situations in which people just aren't into logical argumentation, like that's not just not quite how political discourse works these days. Arguably, it's never how political discourse worked, considering that we can go back to like the era of the founding fathers and we can see like just the kind of propaganda that was getting passed around in like the Adams Jefferson election, that sort of thing. Like it was never just about rational argumentation. And as long as it's never just about rational argumentation, then you don't just have to worry about what you're saying. You have to worry about looking normal when you say it, and being able to offer. And this is where it gets very cynical. There's a heavy psychological benefit to being progressive, regardless of if you think the arguments are all correct. If you are progressive, then you believe that it is eventually possible to create this utopian government, and you believe that because a lot of like more extreme progressives, it's to the point where it's like you talk with someone and it's like, okay, you claim you have all of the right political views, you claim you donate to all of the right causes, and the fact that you so stridently believe that you have the right ideas and you're on the right side of history means that you think because you have the right ends, you can just be horrible to people all you want. And because like you've mentally cast yourself as the hero of not just your own story, but everybody else's. That is a lot of like progressive extremists who are really into the like hoorah protesting type thing. They come off like that,
It's like
where
narcissism, isn't it? It's like narcissistic to be that way.
oh,
Yeah.
Oh, very much. It's narcissistic, especially considering that like it eventually comes out where as I've mentioned before, like if you feel comfortable like spewing racist comments towards like a black person on the right, when you say live in dirty secret about Portland, I'm like 95% certain that it's like statistically speaking the whitest major city in the US. So like, places like that, you're white, all of your friends are white, your whole family is white. You feel comfortable hopping online and spewing racist comments at a black person because for some reason in the bizarre mental construct that you have created for yourself, your act of bigotry towards a black person who doesn't share the same ideas as you somehow shakes out in the logic of original sin that is like systemic bigotry to be like a stroke for justice. It's just, if it gets to that point, then it's like you've created a quasi-religious construct in your head with the justice of the state as God, where you are an evangelist and you are spreading a gospel. You don't know that it's a gospel, but it's a gospel. Even the godless end up worshiping something.
Yeah.
And here it is. You've created, in the absence of anything else around which to structure your life, you have created this construct where like you don't actually consider the opinions of other people, even the demographics that you claim to help. You're simply using out of some sort of like you're using them like cheap tokenism, and you're using their approval the same way a Christian might walk into a confession booth.
I think it's something that if I was a black person or another minority, Latino or whatever, and being continually typecast as being poor and needing help, I would resent it enormously because there's some fantastically successful people all across various groups, and it seems to me that to be typecast as that, you're being typecasted by the left, by the Democrats. Trump was the person who said, well, what have you got to lose? Come on, come up, come in and get these jobs. and then build yourself up from there. You get some skills, you go on and get a better job. I mean, my working life started on building sites. That was it. And I worked all my way up from there, and eventually I was running my own company. So it was, and I didn't have any formal training or anything. So it's there in everybody if you just see what works. And you don't have to, you're not actually there trying to reinvent the wheel. Just look at what other people are doing, and then just do it better. It's the easiest way to get going. And I think, as I say, I'd resent it enormously if I just keep hearing it on the TV and the radio and every politician saying, oh, you need our help. You can't be anything without our help, without handouts, without this, without that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, not to get like too far into the weeds on personal experience, but at least in some let's just say social interactions that I've had in the past, where people will hear like, oh yeah, I'm double majoring economics, applied math. They'll latch on to the math thing and then hop on the like, what is it like to be a woman in STEM train?
Yeah.
Which, how would I know?
Yeah.
I just work here type thing, which it's, you don't want to get too smarmy about it, because like, okay, your heart's in the right place and you're trying to be nice about it. And I know it's at least a little bit unusual, but like, it's just an aspect of your life. You don't like this intense, like unwavering focus on it can't help but feel at least a little bit, I don't know, like bizarre. It's it just, especially in situations where people will pay lip service to all of this sort of thing. And I've seen this sort of thing happen in like my university experience. You'll have people pay lip service all of the time to how like, oh yeah, we're welcoming of minorities and stuff like that, and then you watch as they, in service of like the woke rhetoric, just completely ignore it when it's making people in the room who are members of minorities like obviously uncomfortable. I was once, I'm not going to go into it, but it used to happen all the time, just because there were so many people back in Portland who felt the need, because they were on some level aware that they were born into a degree of privilege, being white, college educated, and living in a really rich area. But they felt the need to exhume that by using other people as props. Which is,
there is an avoidance in there as well, isn't it? They don't have to look at their own lives. If they can take on the world, fix the world, then you don't have to look at all the things that aren't working in their own lives, and all the faults and things that they have. They don't have to address that. They can address it on a global scale. And it just makes, which is, a ridiculous way to live your life. It's like living your life, 3,000 miles away. You've got to live your life as you are, fasten your own seatbelt, put your own oxygen mask on before you try to help others.
Yeah, it's that sort of thing just played out over and over again. It's
and the other thing we were talking about, say black and black conservatives. It's interesting because they want black people to be represented in all levels of society except conservatism. This is the one area. Well, hang on, it doesn't apply to conservatism. It's like, I wouldn't consider myself a conservative, but at the moment I can kind of understand their viewpoint better. I think perhaps without getting off the subject, but when you see little short clips like Ayn Rand's conservative sellout of capitalism, it's great because they say these things, and then immediately when they should be defending capitalism, they actually capitulate to basically government controls. So, but
yeah. I mean, generally the conservative relationship to the economic discipline is like a whole other ball of wax. But just as far as like members of minority groups who are conservative, there was an instance back when Okay, so what we had back in Portland was the situation with like Antifa and Andy No.
Hmm.
I'm assuming you're somewhat
Yeah,
familiar with
sure.
him.
Yeah, yeah. When they threw
Yeah.
the frozen milkshakes in his face and stuff, and smashed his face up and everything. Yes.
Oh yeah, there's that sort of thing. And then there's the time okay, I'm not able to pull out like a specific news article for this, but I
Hmm.
swear I remember hearing like some months back that they found some random Asian guy in the street, thought he was Andy No, and then just at least threatened to physically assault him.
Wow.
So, yeah, it'd be funny if it wasn't just so bleak.
So, it just doesn't make sense, does it? It's like they're for minorities, but as soon as minorities don't agree with what they say, then minorities are just treated like, a Trump supporter or treated like a pariah.
Mhm.
And it's almost like they feel they've got justification for doing it. When you look at the death toll for the left compared with the pretty moderate death toll for what happened in the Second World War for the right, and don't forget the left came first. Facing the communist onslaught. What the hell was Europe going to do? If that had really happened as the way it was, fortunately Russia wasn't particularly strong. They even lost to Finland twice during the Second World War. So yeah.
Yeah, it's very. You have to ask yourself, like, what kind of life do you have to lead, where you get to the point where you feel like you have the right
Hmm.
to dictate that to other, like, how much moral rectitude combined with self-confidence have you possibly got to
Hmm.
have in order to feel the need to do all this? And I'd argue that it's like the byproduct of like when living in a coastal area where it's like your school supports you,
Hmm.
everybody you know supports you, your workplace supports you, every major corporation supports you, every major media outlet supports you. You use social media, and the CEO of the company purges everybody you don't like. You could go on and on and on,
Hmm.
where it's just the amount of effort you go to put yourself in this ideological citadel where you are not at any point exposed to somebody who could like knock you off your high horse.
Hmm.
uh of course, that's the only way. That's the
I
only
think
way.
I could shed some light on that because I remember, I could relate an experience to me, but I remember, my kids go to a local school, and we often have parents' evenings, which you end up down the pub and stuff like that. And I remember there was a woman, she must have been 40 something, and she was one of the mothers of one of the children at the school, and she was a lawyer for a big law firm, and she said, in the course of the conversation, and my wife, by the way, is Hungarian, grew up under communism. Her parents, or great grandparents, had their farm taken, and it was actually given back after 1989. And her father now got the family farm back, and it was a sizable thing, even though he's sort of a one man farmer with I think he employs one or two people occasionally. But she was sitting at the table with me, so she knows everything about communism and what the left have done. And this woman, this lawyer in this law firm, had said, me, I'm nice and left wing. And my wife kicked me under the table, like, don't you dare say anything. I have to talk to these people every day. You don't, at the school gate. So, and it was like, oh, right, yeah, great. But this was
Oh yeah.
literally the mindset because everybody is agreeing with them and telling them, yes, it's great to be virtuous, it's great to be altruistic, and they don't see the downside of that. I always think socialism shouldn't be practiced outside the home, is one of the outside of the nuclear family. But and as well as that, casting my mind back to when I was your age, perhaps when I was at a college, studying biology and something else, English. I didn't do very well at that. I should have done business studies, but basically, I remember, some sort of protest would come up or something would say, oh, well, what do you think about this? And if it sounded nice, I would probably go, yeah, that sounds like a nice thing to do. I literally did not think any further than that. I certainly didn't think of the depth of which the media and everything else is manipulating. You just assumed they would be telling the truth and they had your best interests at heart and they would be honest, decent people, but it's the opposite is what they are. And of course, none of them can actually expose the lie. If they do, they have to confront themselves, which is usually the last thing that a lot of people want to confront. I've done enough, sort of empowerment courses and things and how to be a great leader and all this type of thing to realize that most people are absolute cowards when it comes to dealing with themselves, but they're very brave at telling you how to run your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. You should take this risk. You should do this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's especially fun because like just living where I do now, Oklahoma, a relatively rural area, very right wing. I don't think there's a single blue county in Oklahoma.
Wow.
But for the most part, just going about my daily business, I couldn't tell. Might just be, I admit, might just be because I'm in a college town or that sort of thing. But everybody here leaves well enough alone compared to basically everywhere else I've lived for most of my life, where if somebody's got an opinion, regardless if it's a political opinion, there's just for certain opinions that are just like morally charged enough in the progressive mind, for a lot of these people, there's just no filter whatsoever. You'll just have someone like walking straight up to you and talking about how they think like people who are pro-life or like people who are anti-immigration or like pick your issue are like imbecilic backwater hicks, something, bitter clingers, something. And they have no problem dropping the kind of like insults on like poor white people who live rurally, which for the record, like Appalachia is the poorest, least privileged area in the entire nation, mostly white, but you wouldn't know it because these people are the last people that it is acceptable to criticize based on like race and class. Yeah. So but it's genuinely like the only way you could get to the point where like you're that inconsiderate of like, what if another person thought differently from me and they didn't kick puppies as a hobby? Like the disconnect is such where it's like if you just come out with it to them, there's no way that they're going to take that well. And honestly, I pity the kind of conservatives who try because, who try to do the whole like, oh yeah, I'm going to use facts and logic to really, I'm going to like, own the libs, look good in front of my friends, et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't fly just because of the sheer quantity of like pre-existing assumptions and pre-existing biases that you are going to have to get past to get to anything even approaching in like an honest discussion in a lot of these situations. Like it's sad, especially because like these exact same people, they're willing to acknowledge basically every single kind of privilege except for the one that statistically speaking impacts the most about somebody's quality of life. Why? Because everybody in rich areas in America is liberal. Statistically speaking,
I think you said you're saying about 28% of Republicans vote for Trump, where 45% of people who are rich people, will vote for the Democrats and Hillary Clinton.
Oh yeah, quick clarifying point on that. Yes. Basically, above people who make $100,000 and above, if they were Republican, 20% of them were voting for Trump. If they were Democrat, 48% were voting for Hillary.
Wow.
And then above 250,000, once it goes above $250,000 back in 2016, 53% Hillary and 25% for Trump. Wow. You go through like between 2016 and 2020, you take a look at the numbers of like the 2020 election, which there are many things in the numbers of the 2020 election that I am not going to get into right now. But one particularly interesting point, support for Trump gained despite all odds, despite every single negative thing that you could see like in the media. And I am by no means the biggest fan of the Orange Man.
No, me either. But it's like I just like the way he was exposing quite a lot and the way they were attacking him.
Yes.
And that was the thing. I was defending the fact. I'm going, well, this is going to be us. This is going to be the free market people. When we get there. So we want to get this out in the open and shine the spotlight on these people that are doing it and how they're going about it, because it's coming our way soon.
Yeah. What's funny is that as far as compared to like Bush in the aughts, if you went back in time to like 2000, like 2002, and told the average liberal, like, yeah, a president with a president who's like, a president who's anti-war and who doesn't really care about enforcing conservative domestic issues comes into office, they would be like over the moon. And then you'd say under a Republican ticket and they wouldn't get what's going on. And then you'd say, oh yeah, and the entire left hates his guts.
Yeah.
It's like, it's barely got a basis in policy, considering you could, and people have done this already. I'm not going to like waste oxygen by doing it yet again, but like, going through every single policy of Trump's and pointing out like, yep, would you look at that? Liberal president did that. No one cared. Liberal president did that. No one cared. This would have been considered left wing like 10 years ago, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not actually about the policy. It is about Trump's character in general, just exemplifying like the populist, poor white type character, even though he himself is, obviously completely like extremely rich, but like that McDonald's in the White House brash irreverence for the mainstream institutions that for some reason between like the 70s and now the progressive left fell in love with. No, it's about that. If anything else, and it's
also about the fact that they just want power. They don't, like you can see as soon as Joe Biden gets in, they do pretty much the same things that Trump did, and it's all, they've still got kids in cages at the border. As but oh no, they're now in wire accommodation. It's just that they'll just rename it and do something else. But they just want power. They don't want Trump to be a success. Or they didn't want anything he did, even though there was, even perhaps you and I as Austrian school would go, well, look what he did to the, printing money and all this sort of thing. It was a terrible thing, but he didn't have an ideology behind it of doing it. He just probably thought that's the way we get the economy going. And I've read quite a few of his books. He was even for the gold standard at one point. I don't know whether that was just to get people on his side, perhaps like us or something. But, the left is all about, they just want power. They don't care what the policy is, as long as they get the power and that they have the control. They don't want anybody else opposing them. And they know if Trump was a success, then somebody else would come along who would do a better job than Trump. And then they'd be in a lot of trouble, and they'd probably be, like the Labour Party would be in this country, wouldn't get power again for generations. And this, I think, is the main thrusting core of it. But to also pick up on your point about the percentage of people, of rich people that vote for Democrat, well, it's straight away you go, well, you can see that if you want government regulation putting money your way by influence peddling, vote for Hillary Clinton. If you want to go out on your own and make your own way in the world, facing customer-facing competitive companies, then you would be a Republican. And there's not a lot of those people around. It's a great skill to do that.
Yeah, it's like, why do you think that people like Jeff Bezos, I believe Abigail Disney, all of these like billionaires keep coming out in support of either directly or through the media properties that they own, income redistributionism? It's not out of the goodness of their hearts. No. If it was out of the goodness of their hearts and they actually believed in income redistributionism, then they take some of those billions that they have and actually give it to something that benefits someone other than them.
Well, perhaps they shouldn't have taken so much money off of everybody making their billions. That's how you don't get loads of billions of dollars and then hand out, like, I don't know, George Soros hand out